there, and welcome back to The Marketing Hustle. If you don't know me yet, I'm your host, Lottie Unwin, and I'm the founder of two businesses. The first is called Upworld, which is a community for all people in startup marketing. And the second is Brand Hackers, where we build fractional marketing teams for brands with big dreams. In The Marketing Hustle, I get the opportunity to chat to founders that I am just desperate to hear stories from who run brands I really wish I could work for. Today, I had the chance to interview Freddie Blackett, who's the founder of Patch Plants. Freddie's been building Patch for 8 years until very recently when he just stepped away from the company and is now in the middle of a summer of reflection, so there was lots to get into. Freddie and I talked about the importance of brand building, we talked about how to find your first early customers, and a lot about his experience moving from founder life to life as chief of strategy within a business that acquired Patch Plants, and now onto his new future steps as a next time founder. I can't wait to hear what you think of the episode. Please do get in touch to share your thoughts. And I'm particularly interested to hear how many of you take Freddie up on his offer of coaching. We're going to start with a couple of quick fire questions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What is your best day as a founder?
Sorry.
What was?
What was my best day? But I was also going to ask in experience, or if I was to design my best day, what would it look like?
No, what was your favourite day ever?
First sale, I think, probably.
Tell me more.
So, Patch started in April 2016, and really we were very focused on the problem early doors. And that problem was that it was kind of threefold. One, that's people found it kind of our generation, and also like urban demographic, found it hard to get into plants. They weren't particularly inspired by the brands and marketing out there and the customer experiences. They didn't know what to buy, and then they didn't know how to look after them. And, right at the very beginning, I wasn't that confident just sticking, as no one should be, sticking money into digital ads and going, right, let's hit and hope. And instead we went, well, where do we think we can find the most concentrated number of, and hopefully quite a high number of people who we think experience this problem? And someone, I can't take credit for it, said the Olympic Park, which is now East Village. 3,500, I think it is at the time at least, 3,500 flats, shared ownership. So typically, first homeowners, mid-20s to, mid-30s, 40s. And, they've moved to a place which is actually quite green in the surroundings, but, they're blocks of flats with a tiny little balcony hanging off the edge of it. And so we thought, okay, well, let's develop this proposition for them in a very focused way. So we hired out an Airbnb and did a photo shoot on a balcony which overlooked the Olympic Stadium, and then turned that into 12,000 flyers, and then knocked on all of the kind of main doors, got delivery for your next door neighbor type thing, walked in, flyed every single flat, and then just saw the leads come in. And that was super exciting. But it took
so good.
It's so good, especially with all the tellings off we got from the site manager that what are you doing breaking into all these blocks of flats. And then 3 or 4 days later, and to explain Patch, well, it's now quite a kind of, it's quite, I was going to say generic, that's very super critical, it's not generic, but it's a general online plant shop. At the beginning it was very personalized kind of online garden designer for your balcony. That was kind of our wedge in. And so the leads came in, right, to say, I want you to come and do my balcony. And we had to, very simple questionnaire, which way does it face and how high up is it and that kind of thing. And so I got this flood of leads, like amazing conversion rate from this first campaign. And then there was this delay, I guess, while we'd sent back some proposals and waited. And in the meantime, I was preparing to make some deliveries that weekend. So think that I was delivering, sent off all these flyers the weekend before, and I was expecting to make some deliveries the weekend after. And, bought all these plants and assuming I was going to make some deliveries. Then finally that first one came in, this nice guy called Simon. And I made him my first delivery. And then it just, that's first sale. It's just totally enlivening.
And the first proposition was balcony design.
Yeah, the line we had on the T-shirt was "Create your perfect urban garden." I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, It was, when I thought of it and I had my kind of like one page or like, what would you call it, lean canvas type thing. It was, I thought of it as, thread.com for gardeners or for gardens. And that was how it was at the beginning, yeah. It was mostly outdoor. Phase 2 was going to be indoor, but we thought it was going to be kind of secondary to outdoor. And it was a very personalized experience. But it was great because it should be back then because, you get to meet your customers, you get to speak to them, really understand their problems. They've all got your mobile phone number, so they're telling you when they're pissed off about something, or when they're super happy, and you get to see. I remember I've got all these screenshots of all these lovely people. I remember spending loads of time trying to get over the line, writing all nice comments on Facebook and stuff like that to their little East Village community.
I love that you targeted an area. Like every time we do these talks, we talk about, like every episode, we talk about focus of your target customer. Mm-hmm. But to take it that far and to target like effectively a few blocks of flats and make your content specific to that area.
Super specific.
Super specific, but it's so inspiring. And of course it worked.
Yeah, it was great. It was an amazing proof point. I mean, we probably ended up getting a 10 to 15% market share of that, or share of
that highly competitive market.
With that highly competitive market, right. But we probably ended up delivering to 300, 350, 400 flats in that block.
That's incredible. How did the patch proposition change? What was the story from bespoke balcony design to what we know now?
Well, really, like the fundamentals of it haven't changed a jot. We think of these 3 kind of pillars to the value proposition. Inspiration, that's to say, imagery and brand and customer experience that we, in a very general sense, recognize and are excited by. Because, gardening has just been so exclusionary to the younger generation, or to anyone who doesn't really know what they're talking about. I mean, like the number of times that I went into a garden centre and was made to, and I had this from so many different customers, made to feel stupid by someone, one of the retail assistants or workers there saying, laughing at someone for not knowing the difference between a pelargonium and a geranium, that kind of thing. It's just ridiculous. It's mad, really. Because I think it's a lot of it's because folks who work in gardening love the products. They don't necessarily they don't get up out of bed every morning to sell products. And so I don't think they really empathize with the customer in a way that a good business does. But anyway, so you got that point about inspiration, a brand experience that's totally different, but it's fresh and modern. Confidence, this idea that most of us, well, everyone at some point doesn't know what they're doing when it comes to plants, and trying to give people, an idea of what's right for them and their space. Them and their space is probably that V1 of the proposition, because we believe that if you've got you've got a nice fig tree over there in the corner, which probably wouldn't work very well in a slightly darker part of your place, right? But in the case of Patch V1, it was we're actually being very specific about what plants you should have at what different times of the year, etc. And then how to look after those plants when you get them. Key thing, right? You buy a t-shirt, you don't really care about how to look after that thing once you got it. Of course, you have a good sense of it, but you really need to know how to look after plants, right? It's a living product. So again, that's not something that the gardening industry has done a very good job with, in part because of the way its business model. It's just, it doesn't really have much of a post-purchase experience for the customer. And then the final one around convenience, the idea that, we live in central-ish London, and we have a car, but most people don't nowadays, or I don't think many people want to have a car with all the faff around it. And so the idea of bringing a couple of Kentia palms back in an Uber is not going to do much for your Uber rating, and it's just the right faff. So the convenience of a great online delivery proposition. So those 3 things. I remember sitting in a room with Fleur, who was my very first person mad enough to come and join us on day 2. We sat down and went, right, after we'd done 35 customer interviews, how do we really try and knuckle this down into 3 things? And those 3 things are true still. They inform the values of the business. And I think you speak to anyone in the business who's been there, still there, or is familiar with the business, I think would recognize it. If you are in one of these blocks of flats, having something out there which is, okay, fine, you might not use it in winter, but it's nice to look at something that looks good, right? And so I believe that there was a need there, but it wasn't a painful need in the way that it was a painful need in spring, summer, or wasn't as painful at least. And so there was a business need for us to like continue selling products. And like I say, I was looking back on my lean canvas model the other day when I was talking to someone about it, and it is in there from day one. It's like phase 2 indoor plants. I was like, okay, fine. It wasn't just like a piece of work, but we just realized that we had to go and do something about it. So we went down to a friend's flat in de Beauvoir, an amazing flat, beautiful place. And I shot the first photos with a friend. And this guy, I can't believe I got away with just like basically a bottle of wine. I think I probably gave him, if that, because these photos I think are still on our site. Some of the best photos we've ever taken of our products. And then I think basically generalized the digital customer experience a bit more. So it was a bit more of a classic e-commerce funnel, and those products just started flying. So this is like January 2017, and then it's, like, in hindsight, just made it so much sense. Like, okay, so we had that clearly there was value in the brand proposition and the value proposition. Actually, at that point, it was really just a value proposition, because I don't think we'd really done anything with the brand. I mean, the distinction being that, you know, the service proposition and the products and that combination was working, but there wasn't much like identity to the brand, right?
Yeah.
That was clearly like meeting a need. People were excited about it, and I'd done a load of customer development to understand that pain point, and I felt like I'd done a good job of that. But you know, it's the point when we started selling indoor plants, I think it just became very clear to us very quickly that we were at the start of this amazing virtuous cycle, where there was this combo of, right at the beginning of category growth, we had jumped on that and we were ready to kind of really drive that category growth, but also be kind of lifted by, you never really know when you're in it who's doing more of the heavy lifting. But we were the only brand in the space for a very long time, and we stuck a load of money into growing the category, really with a focus of, you know, why don't you think about plants? You know, when you're thinking about what to spend your disposable income on this month, take a look at plants. You know, plants was really our proposition. It was plants can bring a home to life, and that was really what we were selling, the category, but with a great brand and customer experience behind it. Yeah.
How did you market the category?
I guess the idea that, you know, this is 2017 at this point. So this is probably almost like peak made.com. And also, I think at the point when minimalism was just fading out of fashion, and people were starting to get a bit more comfortable with flash of color here and stuff, and shapes. And so our imagery, which is, you know, very like made.com inspired, I'm sure it is. You know, but that was deliberate, I'm sure. But, you know, that idea and that principle with a beautiful plant in it, you know, with, like I say, with a classic shape in it, something a bit kind of angular, was kind of, it just helped people tip those out of minimalism into something that's not quite maximalist, but was minimalism with a bit of an edge. And so so this idea of plants bring a home to life was I guess that was kind of category proposition, if you will.
So it sounds like a very intentional approach to imagery.
Yeah.
That puts, you know, and you talk about the made.com era, but I actually think that's such a good label for a particular period of time, for a particular generation.
Of e-commerce or of
e-commerce,
customers.
but also just like that was my first flat. Like I was the made.com customer, and I really know what you mean when you say that. Like I was curating my life by a particular aesthetic that was dominated by one brand. Yeah. And I suppose you're just riding on the coattails of that aesthetic and their media spend.
Yeah, for sure.
So you have really good imagery, and then is it all coming from Meta, which wasn't even Meta then? Like, where are you finding customers? Is it still flyers?
Not from flyers, no. I mean, it was, I guess this is pretty playbook stuff, but there was clearly some existing demand that wasn't being like adequately fulfilled by online players. So we mopped up the kind of that bottom of funnel demand from Google pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But then, and really that was probably the bulk of our first year of growth if I remember correctly, with then just a really good customer experience on site. So nothing really that anyone had seen before in the category, certainly, but with cues from adjacent categories to give people that kind of reassurance.
Yeah.
And then, definitely Facebook as it was, this is definitely it wasn't pre-Instagram, but pre-Instagram in its current form, was a massive channel for us. This is kind of, again, you can use a reference point, this is like Mojave era as well. Yeah. And Mojave's, in terms of the kind of the Facebook arbitrage, I mean, Mojave's maximized, absolutely dominated that for a number of years, and then until they didn't. And then, that business, when there was one of the many algorithm changes, suddenly was completely lost. And that was really the era that we were jumping into. It's like, right, come on, this is like finding gold. And I think probably at first it was very simple. It was very image based. Really, we didn't go into video and motion more generally until 2018-19, when we started doing really nice brand ads and lovely forgive me, I've forgotten the word, but like cartoon type image motion, and like I say, because we were first, I mean, that was really one of our big advantages. I think like there's definitely it's a bit trendy to talk about how first mover advantage is actually disadvantaged. I just don't believe that in the business that we were in, at least, where brand has a huge, I mean, we did, I think, also have a very good brand, but the brand we built and the attachment that we essentially had with the category, I think most people think of, when they think of what our business is called, I think they think of it as Patch Plants, and that's in many ways annoying to me because the brand is Patch, but objectively it's actually a great thing because people go, is that a patch plant? And that's ultimately what you want. So that was that was a huge advantage to us, being there 3 years, I guess, before anyone else.
Did things get spicy when the good era of Facebook ended?
It didn't get spicy because we had, like I say, we were in that virtuous cycle and we hedged our bets. No, hedged our bets is a negative way of putting it. We diversified a lot. So we had, brand was a really important strategic choice for our business. Can I go into this in a bit more detail?
Yeah.
Because I actually think this is, when I reflect on the business, I think this is a really important decision we took. So I was previously in branding. I worked in branding for 6 years. My dad worked in branding. It's just in the
your
blood.
bones, yeah.
And there's this idea of role of brand. So not all categories are made equal in terms of how important a brand is in the purchase decision, right? So there tends to be kind of two big factors. One is how easy it is to compare and contrast the product, and the other is how emotional that product purchase is. I felt that the role of brand should be super high, but there were no big brands in our category because it's very hard to compare and contrast a plant. You don't know how much, whatever, a fig tree is going to cost, or a
or one fig tree versus another fig tree.
Exactly. Then you get the differences in terms of like how wide the pot size is. Sometimes you're like, well, hang on a sec, that's only like 5 centimeters wide and it cost me another 40 quid. That's crazy. It's hard to get to another, not like, buying a can of Coke from a Sainsbury's, you can pop over the road to a Tesco. Like your nearest garden centre, apart from the one you're in, is probably miles away. So from that perspective, it's the role of brand should be high. And then in terms of emotion, it should be high. Like I remember speaking to someone when we did our first 35 customer interviews, and she said to me, I killed this plant. She was telling me this big story about her last experience buying plants. I killed this thing, and I was like despondent. I was desperate for a couple of days after. It's like, if I can't look after a plant, how am I going to look after a child? So, and you do hear these stories of people getting very kind of cut up about not being able to look after something. And by contrast, the value of having plants, that you have something to look after, especially if you're on your own or you're isolated. And so I felt like, wow, this on both scales, brand should play a big part, but there's no one here. Like I couldn't name a brand in the category really apart from Patch. Obviously it wasn't at the time. So I felt like brand should play a big part. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because when it came to Facebook and you know, when there was a big shift there, I actually felt, yes, we found it difficult. We definitely found it difficult in whatever it was, 2021, when iOS 14 and all that stuff. But actually we had diversified our marketing mix so much, and so much of our acquisition came from word of mouth because of, you know, okay, at a category level, again, it's quite a, talk aboutable product.
Yeah.
You know, you come into your space, you've got that beautiful plant behind you. It's like, wow, where'd you get that from, or whatever. But also, you know, we did a lot of PR in the early days, and with a very deliberate like brand angle to it, in a way that, you know, spread around the world in some cases. So we were quite well diversified, such that we were never too dependent on a single channel. And I think we owned the category. I still think we do.
Does this mean that your brain is whirring with other categories that are emotional and where you you compare things directly?
It's a neat
very neat framework. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we talked about a category earlier where the role of brand is very low and where actually it could be really high. Some categories that already exist. You know, if you think about water, right? It's a completely commoditized product. And there are already many brands in it, but no one has really done it properly until Liquid Death turned up. And suddenly everyone, you know, it completely shakes up what we think of when we think of, you know, brand being serving a very functional need of quenching thirst to something that murders your thirst. Is like, wow, that's insanely brilliant. So I think, you know, how you can, whether there's categories where there are already people who assume that brand is saturated, if you will. That's not me extending the water metaphor, like, you know, where there are too many brands in a space where actually people have just been looking at each other for too long in that kind of Spider-Man meme, and someone comes in and goes, you've been thinking about this all wrong.
Well, they've forgotten to ask consumers whether they actually care.
Like
water, I think, is a really good example where the water brands can sit around a table feeling like there's lots of great water brands.
Yeah.
And you stop someone in the street and they don't feel anything about Evian anymore.
No, I guess not.
Like those babies on roller skates were a long time ago.
Those babies on roller skates. How long ago was that?
I don't know, but that was good.
Yeah, that was good content.
Back in its day, that was good emotional branding.
Yeah.
So you referenced that this is now past tense.
Yeah.
How's that transition been?
Yeah, in the main, it's been really good. I was there for 8.5 years. I probably felt it was time for me to move on about 1.5 years ago, and then the business was acquired, and so I moved into a different role, and that was very exciting, and I really enjoyed it. But I think one of the factors in you being ready to move on is whether you feel that there's the right people around you to take it on, and the people I've handed on to are just exceptionally good. So
good.
You're always going to, when you move on from something, I'm sure you'll feel this or have felt this in the past, is there's something is going to drop as a result of you leaving. Something is, it might be something that's live, right? A project that's going on right now. In the case of a patch, I was working on something, getting the business onto Oxford Street. But there were so many times before where I was like, oh, I could leave now, but Christ, that thing that's going to drop is actually potentially, Armageddon level of dropping. So I just felt that the things that were going to drop were actually pretty small. So, and I'm just ready to go and do something new and exciting. And
I think I'd love to kind of hear more about what. So I think we all have feelings. We all have those thoughts of like, what if it's my time to move on from whatever I'm doing in life?
Yeah.
Those thoughts then hit a saturation point where you decide to act on it. What were those signs that made you think, like, I'm in a different headspace now? And you touched upon one thing being true around the quality of the team. Like, what else had to be in place for you to feel like that was the right decision?
Good question. Quality of team is a really important one, but probably the most important is the business's stability. Patch has had many ups and downs over the last 8 years. Fortunately, more ups and downs, but getting it to stable profitability, safe in its, in the acquired company, and with really no risk of it falling down as a result of my departure. There's
Yeah.
always a risk that a business could, businesses have lifespans, but as a direct result of my departure, there's no risk to it. So that's probably quite a big question to ask, and that's typically measured on how many months of profitability have we had in the last 12. What's the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I think there's probably a push factor as well, which is like incrementalism. I think when you do join a big business, it becomes much more incremental in its growth mindset, rather than, in the case of Patch, like I was speaking to a friend of mine earlier about this, an old colleague. I was asking for some of his feedback on my leadership and what he got value from, what he didn't, etc. And we talked about some of the kind of near misses almost, or near hits that we had. And one of them was that we almost built a media brand before people thought of consumer brands being media brands. So do you know what I mean by that in terms of, a lot of these, Liquid Death we've just spoken about, like is a media brand first that happens to sell water, or it's a content brand really.
Yeah.
It's like it is its own media channel through which it serves incredible content. As soon as that engine stops, that business goes from being worth 7 times revenue to being 1 times revenue, like all of its comparators. And we actually came pretty close to doing something like that, in that we created amazing content, both in terms of informative, fresh care content, to something, bit sillier stuff, to great PR. And we could have majored on something like that. And that would have been a big growth bet, but probably also would have done us very well, and probably would have, helped spin that flywheel a little bit harder. And I guess I just felt, post the acquisition, that I didn't really have the scope to think in that level of, possible tangents or, completely different, not even adjacent level thinking, but something very different.
So that you see in hindsight as a near hit.
Yeah, near hit.
Is that how it gets categorized?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What in your post-mortem is going to be a celebration?
Good question. I do think we built a very good brand, right? So if you think about marketing in the kind of context of, so Byron Sharp wrote a book called How Brands Grow, probably in late 2000s, and this idea of really, I guess, how you might define marketing in his definition is, marketing is the building of, or the development of, mental and physical availability. Mental availability really being that the probability that someone recalls your brand when they are in category, and physical availability is that when they are in category, that you are easy to buy from. Mental availability, I think we were really good at the former, certainly. Like, so mental availability, we built kind of some of the kind of the elements of that are, building distinctive assets, using them consistently. Consistency is a really important thing that a lot of people forget, both in small brands and big brands. They assume get bored of it, and they think of how quickly your velocity of content refreshes, and I know I get that the platforms will tell you one thing, but actually I'm not going to go down that path. It's a long one. That's one for another day. But consistency. The like recognition that how easy your brand is to recognize and thus recall. And I think on those things, I think Patch did really well. Like, just objectively, it's a one word brand. It's easy to recall. I think about some of our competitors, which don't think they did that quite as well. We build distinctive brand assets across our customer journey. So one of the things we heard in our original interviews was that customer interviews was that people struggled with the names of all these plants, and so when it came to building our customer experience, we gave these plants what you might think of as silly names, but we anthropomorphized our products. So a Kentia palm we called Big Ken, a snake plant or a mother-in-law's tongue we called Susie after my mother-in-law, and it continued, and that I think is that is a distinctive brand asset, right? So I think we did that very well, and I think those all ladder up to the elements of building a good brand. Physical availability is tough in e-commerce, right? Because fundamentally e-commerce is a smaller part of almost all categories than offline. And I was really quite resistant to putting our brand offline because I felt it didn't deliver on that part of the value proposition around convenience. And I didn't feel that there was a really good need for us to be there. And we tried in many ways. We tried to partner with other brands, but there was always just a mismatch, either in what they were trying to sell and our price point, because our price point was relative to the price we charge for our plants, by the way, are, I think, very are perfectly reasonable. But they also, there's the delivery element to it, and there's all the content that we create around the back, So the idea of charging whatever we charge for a Kensia palm offline, I don't think takes into account all the bits of the value proposition that we deliver. But in answer to your question, I think we built a really good brand. I think maybe we'll think about this aside from this, but we probably took our foot off the gas on our brand development, and it probably didn't continue to grow at the pace that it was growing, just in terms of like what we were adding to it and the story we were telling. We probably cut that story a bit short maybe before we needed to, but that's definitely number one on the list, I'd say.
Offline feels like a little thought worm. You referenced Patch on Oxford Street.
Yeah.
Has that happened?
Yeah, we were on Regent Street like 2 years ago. We've had pop-ups here and there. We did a pop-up with Swoon and
so you've got comfortable with that?
That is not a decision for me to take.
Okay.
So that's someone else to take. I think it's worth having a crack at. But like I say, I don't know. It still wouldn't be top of my priority list, but I do wonder whether it's because I've resisted it so long that
some things you just dig your heels in. Yeah, exactly. That you don't know how to unentrench yourself.
Yeah.
How was your experience of going through the acquisition? And I asked that specifically because I think a lot of people listening to this will have had that experience, or we will be kind of looking down the barrel of that in years to come.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess it's for many businesses, it's the end outcome that a lot of people aim for. It is, Patch is in very good hands now with a company called Arena Online. To give you some context, the cost of delivering one of these products is astronomical relative to, I reckon, a lot of other e-commerce businesses that you take a look at, because of the amount of cardboard that it requires if you're sending it to anywhere outside London. In London, we deliver by hand, but outside London, there are a lot of mouths to feed in the delivery experience.
Fragile, complex,
very fragile. Yes,
creatures.
Not quite like delivering a puppy, but it's not far off.
Yeah.
So that really depends on scale, and we had very good scale during COVID, and we thought, right, great, this business can stand on its own 2 feet very happily. But then coming out of COVID, as anyone in consumer knows that those levels of demand weren't there, and the business was still much bigger than it was pre-COVID. But that when I looked at the P&L and I saw that as a percentage of revenue, our fulfillment costs were widening. You have to go, look, we have to find a way of growing this business now inorganically. And so Arena Online are really specialists in the fulfillment of flowers and plants. And so they're a perfect match. I went to them and said, look, I reckon there's a few problems we can help you with. Yeah. I reckon there's a few things that you can help us with. And it was actually a very quick, it wasn't quite a shotgun wedding, but it was...
Not far.
It wasn't far off, yeah. I mean, we just got on very well, and the business came together, after probably about 2 months of we had known each other, but of that conversation. But there's a point there to be made. Like, it's there are a number of occasions, or not occasions, it's probably one way of putting it, but there are a number of times where the business came close to being acquired by other parties, and it is an incredibly draining experience, much like a funding round, but probably even worse if you are on that venture track. In that you are really coming to grips with the idea of not just passing on your business to another party, and you get quite excited about, or at least I got quite excited about the kind of the synergies, that you could create. It's an awful word, but
does the job.
There are a few others
Yeah.
that really do what you need it to. But I got really excited about working with a couple of businesses that one ultimately just went bust, unfortunately, a big business in our sector. Got really excited about what you can create, and then when that falls down, it's less the kind of, I'm never really that interested, motivated by the financial part of the business. But when you think I guess it's like being on the cusp of a new job, or you just started a new job and then just having the rug pulled out of you or something.
You have to paint a picture.
It's very difficult, and especially when there's so much investment into it, the sale, as in the personal selling, right, of it is it's very intensive. So I guess if there are people listening who are either going down that path or thinking about it, one I'd say is it's in my experience it was a lot harder than I was expecting it to be, and secondly, it's quite hard to come back from it. You start imagining what it's like to be, if you're talking to a single party or talking to a number of parties. It's quite difficult then to go back into, if it doesn't work or whatever, you don't get the terms you want. It's quite difficult to go, right, okay.
We go back into the grind.
To this. Yeah. And I think that's quite a neat way of putting it. I don't think I ever thought of it as a grind, but I did think of it when I came back from, all these, these big external conversations and, all these big businesses. Thinking about all the different ways that we could improve their business and that they can improve ours.
It's a big change of tone.
It's a big change of tone. And I think as a leader, you'd probably just need to be very conscious of how that reflects. Or, you might not have told anyone, but, I think most people can tell when the leader of the business is either low, exactly, or just having a bit of a rough time.
Yeah.
And it will be hard, I think, to kind of, just take some time off if you can do that. In my case, I took 8 weeks off in 2022 after one of these opportunities fell through, and I came back completely rejuvenated. Yeah. I had full faith in Kat, the managing director at the time, and actually the business was much better off for it. I think it's just quite hard to otherwise kind of act it out.
I think there's a lesson in that applies to leaders in fundraising, in potential exit decisions. Like any of these conversations about future direction of the business are uniquely exhausting. And I think you make a really good point that you need to schedule your response to that and communicate. Find a way to some of this is confidential, but find ways to have those conversations publicly because your team, they can smell it on you. Yeah,
you, at the very least, you need to address it.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore it.
Yeah,
for sure.
I hear lots of stories about kind of post-merger come downs. Did you have any fall from grace?
No, I actually really loved my time at Arena Online. It was I was in a very different role. I was I was chief strategy officer. It's not an American business. Building
synergies.
I was just building synergies. Yeah. No, it's a really good company. It's got a great management team working still with all my colleagues. But the business was the patch team became smaller as a result of it. But that actually made me realize, if I'm looking at this objectively, it's quite not inhumane, but it's not a very human way of assessing it. But that was when I realized quite how much we could get done actually with a much smaller team. The number of people who actually no one now. So let me just tell you a little bit about what the post-acquisition
world
strategy looked like. Was that there is a corporate part of that business now at Arena Online, which runs its corporate relationships, which is actually the bulk of that business. And then there's a consumer arm. It has a consumer D2C flower brand called Arena Flowers, and then Patch obviously is in there as well. And there's a consumer. The consumer arm runs those two brands and is looking for other businesses to acquire. Also create from scratch. And so we probably had. I'm going to probably get these numbers wrong, but give or take a couple, around a dozen of people working on those two brands, right? And at its peak, Patch was probably 40 or 50. Now, I'm going to do a disservice to lots of roles that exist at Arena Online, like finance and HR, which we obviously had to have, and doing a disservice to all those people who worked at Patch who did that. But we also, there are in many areas, the business became quite a lot smaller, or those teams became smaller.
Yeah.
And yes, it's hard, but it works. Can I jump onto something else, because this is relevant, is one of my big lessons, I think, and it relates probably more to marketing, was when we restructured the business in 2022. And, restructure is this slightly awkward way of putting, we made lots of roles redundant.
Yeah.
And we assumed that the business could survive a lower marketing spend, because we had very high word of mouth, and we were the outright leader in the category, and we'd mop up lots of middle low funnel. And while that was true, there's this analogy, I think it's in Byron Sharp's book as well, this idea that marketing is like the engine in an airplane, and if you turn that engine off, you might not notice it at first, but that airplane is definitely coming down.
Yeah.
And at some point it's going to hit the ground. And it's going to be much harder to reach those heights again from takeoff rather than where you were. And there's some data around it in either in How Brands Grow or more generally from the institute that he runs. But I think that's something like when you turn off marketing, it has like marketing in terms of like brand building marketing rather than kind of digital sales as you would think of it, like that lower funnel element. There's like a 25% hit on revenue over a 2-year period, and that effect is much greater for smaller businesses, where your brand, kind of your salience, the presence of the brand in the category and in the mind of the customer or the prospect is quite fragile, really. Relative to a business like Coca-Cola, who could probably turn it off and actually would have a much smaller effect. But for a business like ours at our scale, it's such a massive impact. And I think if there are any founders out there or CEOs who are still in this process of resetting the business for the next era or next chapter, it's hard. It's really hard to have to ask people to leave, but I would definitely err on the side of removing roles over removing marketing spend. Hearing myself say that is it's a harsh truth, but I think it's probably right for the business, because in our case we didn't remove enough roles from the business and had to do it again like 6 months later, and that's really hard to do. So it might be that, okay, your content's not refreshing quite as frequently, but just the very fact that your brand is turning up on, your logo is turning up, is about that mental availability thing again. That your logo is turning up on people's feeds, or, if you're trying to do some, you should be pushing to do innovative stuff.
What do you think is a myth about marketing that you'd like to correct?
Oh my goodness. I guess I've got to be so careful. If I might just can see my DMs just exploding from very smart people who disagree with this. I think a lot of what we think of as marketing is not marketing. And I think that is a result of the expansion in the media landscape, i.e. us using digital channels in the last, 15, 20 years, 15 years probably. Such that everything from managing paid search, which paid search is, in the strictest sense, it probably is marketing, because when I talked earlier about physical availability, actually paid search is building physical availability. When someone is in category, you need to make sure your brand is easy to find. You need to be top of Google. Therefore, you need to have clever people working on that, but also on SEO to make sure you're there organically as well. Don't get me wrong. But the conversations that I think a lot of teams have about marketing in what I think are a modern marketing team often don't really relate to marketing. They relate more to digital sales.
Yeah.
And not relate enough to what I said earlier about building and developing mental and physical availability, i.e. assets. I know this is now becoming the Apple of case studies, but there is a reason that Liquid Death is a business that is worth 7 times revenue versus Hint, which is a similar size business, I think, which is a sparkling water brand in the States, is worth 1 times revenue. And that is its brand. And because they have built an incredible brand that just has an amazing engine creating content around it. And I think that a lot of marketers and marketing teams accept mediocrity is probably a bit too harsh, but accept good at a brand level. Maybe even, I think there are a lot of plain brands out there, and they're almost destined for failure, I feel. And they are very good tacticians, these folks, don't get me wrong, but they're not enough strategists in the mix, I think, to make sure that the decisions that they're making and the allocation of resources is right. And it's just a lot of, I think it's a death spiral in a lot of marketing teams.
So marketing's definitely got a lot broader. So I think what you say around SEO and paid analytics and like all of these new areas of the marketing mix, I would argue are marketing, but I think what you're describing is this like growing hole in the middle where brand marketing's been underinvested in and deprioritized by lots of businesses in favor of short-term growth levers.
Yes, I'm definitely not against growth. I'm definitely not against growth people. I think
no,
and the growth discipline, the growth mindset, like I'm all on board for.
But doesn't that sit?
Yeah.
Like I think it's a really incredible skill set that I have deep respect for, and that needs to sit alongside brand marketing, not instead of.
Yes, I mean, we could. There are a million exceptions to the rule, and perhaps they all prove the rule. But I guess so. And obviously it depends as well on the setup of the business, if the founders are still there, what their kind of spikes are, etc.
Yeah.
But I think a good chunk of it is that growth has become the dominant voice because it can be more easily measured.
Yeah. And
there's this lovely phrase that you don't sit down with your partner and measure how much you love each other every week. And that's the most important thing in life. So unfortunately, the hardest things are often the hardest things to measure. But I guess there are a lot of people out there who get very uncomfortable with the idea of some of those metrics that should give leaders confidence in the future value of the business relative to brand. There are lots of businesses out there now that do that, but there are some things that just can't be measured, and maybe you need to put some proxies in place. Like I remember one of the things that we had early on was like we didn't really put enough of a structure around this, but the number of inbound messages we were getting from brands that we really respected that wanted to do partnerships with us.
Nice.
It's
a really good proxy for your star rising.
It's also a really snappy KPI, but it is, yeah. And I guess there are loads of variables at play there that not all of which are in your control, but it's just one of those things that I think is quite valuable. Yeah. But is it going to get is your non-exec director or your VC going to give that any credence? Probably not. So it's an incredibly difficult message to convey, I guess, as the marketer to the CEO if they're different people, and then for that CEO to convey it up the track. But there is also lots of data to support it. It just happens to be that a lot of that data is around bigger businesses than smaller ones. And without being Byron Sharp's biggest fanboy again, but there's a lot of that in his book and more generally in the stuff that the Institute puts up. Yeah. Really hope he sends me a check for all these references.
Byron, come on, we need an affiliate deal. What is one thing, this is our final question, what is one thing that someone listening to this can help you with?
Can help me with? Well, if they have some sparkling idea, a sparkling product innovation but they think that they don't really know how to bring it to market, then they would help me no end this summer as I'm, endlessly gazing at my navel to think about other things and think about my next project. Sorry to turn the question on its head slightly, but I would love for people to get in touch with me if they've got something they're working on and just want to riff on it, because I'm spending lots of time thinking about both what's the last 8 years, but also in this now kind of slightly halfway phase of thinking about what's next, and getting to help people with some of their problems is a really nice way of, it's almost like
that's the most amazing request.
Daily Wordle, right? It's just a little bit of mental, going to the mental gym, I guess.
I'd be so interested how many people have the balls to take you up on that.
Oh yeah,
let's see.
Well, yeah, please do.
Go on, a challenge.
Yeah.
Freddie, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
Thanks, Lottie. I really enjoyed it.
I learned a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Please do remember to follow the podcast. It makes a huge difference to us because we know how many of you are out there listening, and that means that I can get more fantastic guests onto the show. If you could leave a review, that makes a massive difference to us, so we know that there's someone out there hearing what we're doing. And do drop me a DM if you have any feedback or if there's someone you'd like us to get on the show in the next coming episodes. Thank you for listening.